Hello, people of YouTube. This is a Fallen Vegas straight tier list. That should be pretty self-explanatory, and the tiers are pretty simple. Practically no downsides. Good always bad. Build specific for traits that are a little bit more focused and you just can't use on any character, detrimental or regardless, which are for traits that even if they have a bonus, you have to really make use of it unless it's going really well for that. It's not gonna be great on that many characters, and then unnecessary is just for any traits that even if they have a cool effect, they don't do much as other perks do. And we'll get onto that. But first, we have Built to Destroy, which I'd argue it outweighs its own downsides with the weapon degradation by just the amount of money in this game that you can use to repair your weapons and the means that you get to repair your weapons with weapon repair kits, having Eddie and going to Lonesome Road and getting the first upgrade, having Raul in your party, or just paying off, uh, yeah, just paying off NPCs or getting the components for weapon repair kits. It shouldn't be that hard in comparison to 3% critical chance, which doesn't sound like that much, but if you compare it to having that and everything else, and then having this trait along with everything that increases your critical chance, like having the high luck, having the gear, it really does pretty well. And in my playstyle, even it adds up to the way that I play the game at large because it makes my weapons feel like a little bit more realistic. But that's just how I feel about it. Fast shot is a little bit more build specific because even if it doesn't have the same applicability as a bunch of the other traits in this category have, they still do something for a lot of the gameplay. I'm just gonna put trigger discipline in here right next to it. They're pretty equal. Just having the effect of either being more accurate or less accurate in the cost of having higher AP cost for VATs or having less uh, accuracy with your weapons. It depends on what kind of character you're going for, and at the end of the day, it doesn't affect all the types of characters, either like pacifism or melee. And yeah, overall, they still have their place. I argued that fast shot's a little bit better because you can make up for the aim with stuff like VATS perks like Gunslinger or Commando, or you can make it up with just like crouching whenever you shoot or using run and gun, the perk at the very beginning of the game. And for trigger discipline, you can justify it, but slightly less so. The only real perk that makes up for the AP cost is Mafraf, and you only get that in like a little bit later than run and gun. And there's not that many things in the game that decrease AP cost in comparison to the things that increase it. So I make it look like this in terms of ordering, but both of them still have a place. Good natured, good outweighs bad, which is funny to consider what the perk is called. But it still has a perfectly good use in the beginning of the game, especially if you just want to have a lot of skill points at the beginning, which personally I don't need to whenever I play, but it can be really nice if you're doing a pacifist character or a character that's really gonna hone in on specific kinds of play because you're not going to use all 5 combat skills unless you're doing a hybrid character like explosives plus shotgun, which I've seen some people do, or guns for long range and then melee for close range. You're not getting that much negatives in comparison to increasing a lot of passive skills like repair, medicine, science, and etc. So I'd argue that it stays right here. Claustrophobic is build specific as well. Honestly, I should make a category, or should I? Because I'm thinking that a lot of these are made with the intent that you're supposed to roleplay a little bit. But I feel like even looking at that, in this way is detrimental to what I'm trying to do for this build, or for these kinds of characters. So even if you're not like role playing, there's still a gameplay effect that needs to be taken into account, right? I'm gonna consider it the same way I considered like the bed uh, perks in the other tier list, where even if they had a use then as like roleplay additives, they still had a function that didn't add much to the game, so they were kind of a waste. In comparison to these, they really only add more flavor to what you need to do in certain situations. Like, yeah, it's cooler that you can have more special points at the beginning of the day and then less so later on, so you kind of have to play around having a character with a certain sleep schedule, which is a cool idea. The same thing for claustrophobic, but at that point, the traits themselves, they get blocked by, certain things in the game that you don't have control over. Like, oh, I'm playing Dead Money and I can't pick this lock because my perception is down because I don't have either any idea of what time of day it is, or if even if I can see the sky, this is still considered like an inside interior, as opposed to an outside exterior. I say that because video games are weird, and you always have to deal with like what counts as it wouldn't be that problem. It wouldn't be that much of a problem in most cases, but it can still be one, considering just how malleable definitions of the cells in the game can be. I'd argue that this is more consistent though, because you still get to control like when and where you're doing this, and then the early bird trait, it kind of locks you into playing at a certain time of day, which is the same critique I had for Night Person in the other videos, so I'll keep it here more or less. Kamikaze. Um, -2 damage threshold at the beginning of the game is kind of harsh, but if you can get armor really soon, or you're playing like a purposely gas cannon, that's cool, a glass cannon character, it can be like up here, right? Because the bonus action points, how many things actually give you action points in this game? Few sets of armor, action boy or action girl, having high agility, and then the only other way around that is just perks that decrease action point cost, like Mafraf or Plasma Spaz, or perks like that you get through challenges, like the unarmed one, and boy my arms are tired, I think it's called. It decreases your, no, that's the one for getting a million. But there's a challenge perk that you get by using unarmed weapons and dealing a lot of damage with them. But yeah, would I argue that it's above these? These are more consistent, and this doesn't actively stop you from playing the game at some points. Well, it does, but you can control it a lot more of the time. This just makes you more vulnerable all the time, which is kind of a negative that you can't really make up for unless you take perks for it. Which, for the ones in good outweighs bad, you don't necessarily need to take any perks, right? This is sort of a barrier, I think, kind of the great filter of traits in New Vegas, where if a perk gets used just to make up for a downside that a trait gives, then it already needs to be build specific. But yeah, even in spite of what I said before, this is still decent if you can make it work, right? In comparison to this, which is just detrimental regardless, because if you don't know what you're doing in your first playthrough and you pick this thinking it's cool, then you forget you just have -1 perception at all times, in which you'd think, oh, but if I have the trait, then I remember. Maybe you would, but the risk of running a trait that can take away an action point just in the service of making you roleplay as a person that needs glasses, it's a cool idea, but it doesn't actually help you all that much. Like, what do you really need +2 perception for? Like, you want to break a lock, just or you want to pick a lock that's higher lockpick skill? Just get your get your lockpick skill up, or do something about that. Or do you want your energy weapons skill high? Just use energy weapons more often in different ammos and like there's no argument for this trait that really makes it better than what it's supposed to be. And even if it's leaning way into the roleplay, it's kind of losing it at the point where it actively takes out of your character. The only situation that I ever see that this one would be good is like you're wearing the lucky shades, because that for some reason gives you free perception instead of two, like every other every set of glasses. Heavy-handed is definitely build specific, because even if you are playing either unarmed or melee, you need to take into account how much those weapons get from having high critical chance or critical hit damage. Like a lot of the better critical weapons, they have some effect, some either melee or unarmed, that they either knock down the target or they do a special effect that goes along with it. And even if it's not a special effect, just the damage that you get is great. So having basically like gutted damage is something that you need to think about, and it really just railroads you into having a specific few kinds of weapons, like the chainsaw, the thermic lance, and not even the industrial hand, because the industrial hand can crit. It's kind of insane. It's like the in like Jack, the Ripon and Fallout 3 called Jack. That one, I'm pretty sure it can crit whenever, and that made it one of the most powerful weapons in the game melee wise. So definitely something that you need to think about. I put it in between these because even if you think that the damage that you gain momentarily from having higher damage at all with melee or unarmed, it can also just, yeah, screw you up a little bit in the long run. And but if you're not planning to play on the wrong run, and then you're just making a character for the sake of playing it for a little bit, and then you kind of just dip out at like later level 20, level 30 something, that's respectable. Speaking about level 30, Lugan's Loophole, it might just be the best build specific perk, because if you play this right, you practically have no downsides, right? The only downside is that you need to waste your World War Blues trait uh, realignment, because you have to take this either at level 30 and keep leveling up, or you just get stuck at level 30 and you basically lose out on like 10 perk slots because of this trait. But in return, you don't get any alcohol addiction, any chem addiction, any addictions at all. You get higher effects. Basically, if you have chemists from the beginning, and you can do whatever you want, you just can't go to level 30 or above level 30 rather. If we're thinking about it like the metagaming way, where you make the most use out of these in the specific situations where they have, and you can switch back from them whenever you need to at the auto dock in the sink in Big Mountain. Like, yeah, this is probably one of the better ones. And putting it up here, you can pretty handily put skilled, even though I've worn off of using skilled every run that I do, because it was just kind of boring and it made the game go by a little bit too fast. Even if in the long run your character ended up with less levels than if they just got uh, you know, another trade at the beginning, and then they leveled up normally. Just the 10%, minus 10% experience does add up. But with how much experience there is in the game, you don't necessarily need to be worrying about that unless you're like really gunning it for like a specific perk later on. Which, to be fair, a lot of the better perks are earlier in the game, and having 10% perk, having 10% experience loss at that point is not gonna hurt you as much as it is later on. It's like a exponential loss, but you're pretty much in the clear earlier on in terms of perks up to like level 20, I'd say, and then you start feeling the effects of it. And by that point, you've already made most of your character if you're playing right, or you're still making your character. And if you're playing it like this, right, with these two, you can switch off of these and then pick other good traits that can aid you. Then I'm gonna make a character that tries to get the most use out of these, and I'll see how it does. But I trust that it would be pretty good. Hoarder. Uh, I could argue that this is build specific, but in terms of just application, it is so useless most of the time because yeah, you can get extra 50 pounds or something, but at the cost of -1 to every special stat if you don't meet a specific weight requirement. Like, I'm sure that for someone who's a hoarder in this game like me, this trait would be perfect. But I imagine that even if you're carrying items at all times and then you have like a few extra pounds of carrying capacity, you're still gonna hit that limit at one point or another. If you have a strong back, you're still gonna fill. And if you're like me and you grab everything that can be in your inventory in this game, even if you grab a strong back for the extra 50 pounds, you're still gonna reach that limit again in like one level or less in terms of just playing regularly. So I don't feel like it actually adds that much in comparison to what it takes away. I'm sure that someone would come at me and be like, but you just, in the way that I play, it works perfectly fine, but just from the way that I imagine it being and just the actual application of it, it doesn't look that great in any angle. Even if you like switch back from using it in the sink, there's no upside there. Um, Hot-blooded. I used to think that this was a lot worse than it actually was because I never saw anyone using it because I thought, man, like extra damage but you're at 50% health at all times, that sounds really dangerous. And yeah, it is. But I feel like if you play your cards right, you can really make this work in comparison. It is still probably very build specific because there's not that many situations in relation to all the other perks in this game that they give you something in relation to. I need to stop saying in relation. Like Nerd Rage or Eye for Eye, where you need to be walking around like at half health at all times, or walking with a broken limb. That's really annoying. It doesn't really help with all that much unless it's probably the least offensive of those, if I want to be completely fair, because out of all the ones that need you to take damage or be weaker for the perk effect to activate, it still gives you more damage, and you can heal up from that amount of health pretty quickly if you know what you're doing. So I put it at the top of build specific, but in some situations it could be good outweighs bad. Uh, the next one, though, I don't think there's any good case for it. Loose cannon. Like, I want it to work so hard because it feels like it would be a cool idea to like make a character that's solely focused on throwables. But I've done the testing before and it's just completely useless. It might not be as useless as Four Eyes because at least it doesn't actively take away from one of your base attributes. It takes away from a game mechanic that you might not even use if you try and use grenades all that often, or if you don't use spears. I mean, in best case, you use this to throw spears and knives and hatchets and whatnot better in trait of not having that much access to uh, the, to explosives. But I've done the testing before, and even if you make up for it with Heave Ho at the very beginning, like if you level up to 2 and then you get Heave Ho, like, yeah, I guess it makes it a little better, but you rather just have Heave Ho, which, for apparently what the wiki says, it also increases your. I forgot to mention it in the last video, but it increases your throwing in range with grenade launchers and weapons that launch projectiles as well. That way, so it's even better than what I remembered. But yeah. No case for this. At least it doesn't remove one of your attributes straight up, and you have to make up for it for leaving, like, your ability to wear helmets, I guess. But even then, Wild Wasteland. This is going to be very unpopular opinion, but I think Wild Wasteland is rather necessary. Let me explain. It adds a lot of cool references to the game, and I know people who say that they play this game with Wild Wasteland on all the time, or they say that uh, they want. That's one of the things that people say most with the game is that they rather have Wild Wasteland as a toggle instead of it being a trait, and it kind of proves my point that even if it's a really fun idea of having a bunch of references and things that make the game just a little bit more wacky, you're trading it for perks or traits. Well, they're basically the same thing, but you're trading them for traits that leave you better off with more upsides. Like, the best that you can get out of Wild Wasteland in this game is having the alien blaster early on, which is just carrying, but you only have so many ammo out of that until you have to use another weapon. So it is rather unusable at that point. If you're there's only 2 weapons that I think I'd rather get: the alien blaster or the holy hand grenades, which, depending on how the game is feeling, the holy hand grenades can just straight up not spawn in your inventory, or if you pick them up, or if they just fall, or if you go in the place where they're supposed to be, there's like regularly just a fat man or a mini nuke there. There's a mini nuke in the room, but they just fall through the floor. The same thing happens with the holy hand grenades. They just don't appear, and you either need to like go under the floor with console commands, or you need to just reload and hope that it works, which is really bad if you're gunning for an entire playthrough just hoping that you get one. But yeah. And to finish it off, small frame, I put it up here, right? It's the same case with uh, Built to Destroy. I feel like Good Nature is still above it for the stat increases all across the board instead of just one special point. But that one special point you get, but your limbs break more easily, which can be very easily counteracted with adamantium skeleton, or just having a lot of doctor bags or visiting doctors frequently. And then if you do the aforementioned Old World Blues DLC, you have the access to the sink, so you can just fix yourself up and then not have to worry about your limbs breaking at all at any point in the playthrough. But yeah, this is how it looks like in comparison to having all of these and not having them, depending on if you're using the auto dock trait feature. But yeah, that's what that's basically it. If you guys have any suggestions or divergences in opinions, I like to hear, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.